As we continue our series, Encounters with Jesus, this week we study one of my favorite encounters with Jesus. Jesus encounters Simon the Pharisee, the quintessential moralist, and a nameless woman, the immoralist. What Jesus does with these two is striking.
We have been doing a series, this is week 9, of different folks that encountered Jesus, and Jesus encountered them. And some of the people are represented around the stage, as you can see. And he met them at all different kinds of needs and met them uniquely. It's really sort of watching the master at work with people. Today what I'd like to look at is one of my favorite stories in the Gospels. It's two people that we're going to do a comparison and contrast of. It's in Luke chapter 7. If you want to follow along in your Bible, you can, or the message outline has most of the verses we're going to be looking at. And the two people are the moralist and the immoralist. By moralist, what I mean is somebody that thinks, when they think about themselves, they think, I'm good enough. Now, you can be an atheist moralist, good enough, don't need God. You can be a good guy moralist. I don't worry about all that religion stuff. That's okay for some. Or you can be a Christian moralist, although that's almost a contradiction in terms. But you can function as a Christian, or think you are, and still be a moralist, good enough. Now, the moralist at heart sort of has that I'm good enough as I am, but this can be honed to a razor point by the drive inside to be better or to feel superior. I need to be the smartest guy in the room, or the funniest guy in the room, or the one who's at the cutting edge of things. That's a moralist. The immoralist is the person who, like the moralist, wants to feel good now. It's just that for the immoralist, their method is very, very different. The moralist believes, or the immoralist believes, that the way to feel happy is to do what I want, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else. Now, conveniently for the immoralist, rarely do they feel that what they're doing hurts anybody else. Isn't that sweet? I would always like to challenge them to talk to the people in your life that you claim aren't being hurt by what you're doing. Now, both these people appear in our story together at a home. Luke chapter 7, verse 36. One of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him. So he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. Now, a Pharisee was sort of the top kingpin of religiosity. And again, you don't have to be a religious moralist. You can be an atheist moralist or a good guy moralist. But the idea of the Pharisee is he's the quintessential good enough. Nobody could look at that guy and point at any wrong that guy is doing. And he hosts a dinner party. Verse 37. When a woman who had lived a sinful life in that town learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster jar of perfume. Now, what Luke tells us about this particular woman is that she had lived a sinful life. That's a euphemism for prostitute. Your translation in the Bible might be a woman of the town, a nice way of saying prostitute. And she brings her alabaster jar. Now, imagine that you are the dinner host. You spent hours, maybe days, preparing for dinner. Your guests, friends, family are reclining around a table. It's about 1 foot off the ground. You prepared the food. Everybody's there. Everybody's enjoying a good time. You want everything to go just right. And suddenly, a woman of the town, that woman, unintroduced, shows up at the front door and looks around at all the guests and spots Jesus and makes her way around the corner of the room and stands behind Jesus' feet. Luke records that no one said a word to her, and she did not say a word to anyone else. Now, if you are the host, you've prepared this dinner, you have all these guests here, what's going through your mind? There are all kinds of things that might go through your mind. Who is she? What is she doing here? Honey, did you invite her? No, I didn't invite her. Not me. Are you kidding? There are lots of things that might have gone through your mind, but whatever they are, the one likely thing that binds them all together is criticism. It seems like criticism just comes so easy to the moralist. The story we're looking at today is preceded by a story that's sort of strange, but Jesus illustrates the perversity of human nature. He reminds the people that, you remember when John the Baptist came? He lived a Spartan lifestyle. He ate wild locusts and honey. Sacrificial life. Good thing, ostensibly. But when he did that, you all said, he's got a demon. There's something strange and odd about that. They criticized John the Baptist. And Jesus said, when I came, I drank wine and I ate bread, and I ate with tax collectors and sinners. And you said, he's a glutton and a wine bibber, and he has dinner with those people. Again, no matter where on the spectrum someone is, the people have an incredible ability to find something wrong at every point, even with somebody like John the Baptist, who few men have ever lived like him, or even Jesus Christ. Criticism. That's what we have here in the Moralist. Now, the story then sheds a little more light on the second person, the forgiven immoralist. Look back at what Luke records here in verse 37. When a woman who had lived, in the Greek that's past tense, done, action done, over, has no lingering effects into the present, which could have been, the Greek has a past tense like that. That's not the one that Luke uses here. She had been. Now, my guess is she had been that for not very long, as the story will indicate. We're not told exactly, but the story gives a lot of indication that this is pretty recent. In that, learn that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. She brought an alabaster jar of perfume. Now, we're left to sort of conjecture here. My guess is that this woman, over time, is that her heart and her world had just sort of gotten hard and cold and crusty and was shrinking. We call this misery. It's quiet misery. Maybe nobody else sees this. Maybe out in public she's a very vibrant, outgoing, kind of woman. But in her private world, something is shrinking down. Love the word misery. She hears from the crowd that she runs with that this fellow Jesus is coming to town. And I have a suspicion that when she heard that, hope suddenly sprung up within her and sort of hit that muddied part of her heart that it was so easy for her to think about herself and to think maybe things could be different. And then he shows up in town. I suspect that he heard something of the words of Jesus and had experienced something of his forgiveness and love for her before she ever walked in the house. Maybe that day. Maybe the day before, a couple days before. She hears that Jesus is in the house, and her heart had been touched, and this muddied thing in her heart and her muddied past was being washed from her. She was seeing herself in a very different light. For the first time, I think she tasted of what real love was. That somebody knows me and all about my past and still wants to be with me. When she heard that Jesus was at the house, I think that this welled up within her once again and almost rose up so high that the dam inside of her finally burst. And it's almost like she felt compelled to go to that house and to go in. Luke picks up the story here at verse 38. She walks around the room. She stands behind him. Everybody's reclining on the ground, on their side, leaning on an elbow, eating. About this high off the ground. She's standing behind Jesus. Nobody is saying a word. The kids would say, awkward. She stood behind him at his feet, weeping. Now, people weep when they go through sorrow, when they go through pain, or they go through suffering. But people also weep when they know that they've been bad and they're standing in the presence of someone good that loves them and accepts them anyway. Now, the particular situation she was in became extremely awkward. She's standing there behind his feet, and I can imagine that all of Simon's friends around this table are looking at her with laser beam eyes. We're going to find that Simon's very critical of her. I suspect his friends were too. She's standing there looking down at the face of Jesus, standing behind him about where his feet are. And I'll bet you she could feel just the sizzling heat of the other people around that table. Almost like their thoughts were like swords coming out through their eyes and just cutting away at this woman. Who is she? What is she doing here? Why would she come to a place like this? Doesn't she know who the host is? Doesn't she know who the guest of honor is? And as she's standing there, amidst all of that, I suspect that in spite of all that was going on around her, she looked down and Jesus looked up at her. And suddenly all those laser beams and those sword looks that cut deeply really didn't matter all that much. Because somebody else's eyes, his, made contact not just with her eyes, but with her heart in such a way that said something to her inside, all is well. All is well. You don't need to run. You don't need to be humiliated. You don't need to be ashamed. You can stand right here and know that you are enjoyed by at least one person in the room. Me, I'm really glad you're here and delighted that you're here. I have a feeling her feet, instead of wanting to run, were glued to that floor. And she wiped them with her hair. Seems to me that there was, as she's standing there, that she's not just welling up with tears, or her tears aren't just sort of a little bit coming down, but I envision something of a sort of quiet sobbing, enough so that Jesus says that, or Luke says that the tears came down both sides of her cheeks, converged at her chin, and came dripping down onto his feet, sort of like water from a leaky faucet in your bathroom does. Now, I don't know about your bathroom, but in our bathroom, this is not unusual. She's looking at this. He's wearing sandals like everybody does. He's got dusty feet and dirty feet, and she is making a mess. She may have looked up around at some of the people around her. And they probably had looks that we're all really good at, the rolling of the eyes and that look of disgust. Oh, she is making a scene. What is she doing? And she looks at this and she's stuck. What do I don't have Kleenex. I don't have a towel. I don't have my purse. What am I going to do? She wants to do something. She does the only thing she really knows how to do. She reaches back behind her head. She undoes her hair, lets it down in front of her, and then she bends down and begins to take her hair and wipe his feet. Now, I thought about taking off my shoes to illustrate this, but I considered better of this, and though this really isn't the picture of the woman at the moment, from maybe a day or two before it is, but suddenly this woman now sort of disappears. And she morphs into somebody quite different. Somebody like this. Taking her hair, wiping his feet, trying to wipe the dust and the dirt and her tears off. It's sort of like she's got a dry mop. But that's not really working all that well. I have a feeling that as she's doing this, the look of disgust and the heat is rising in the room as people look around her, and she is now embarrassed. She doesn't know what to do. She's lost. But she makes eye contact with Jesus once more, I think. And there's something of that, you're doing well, that I think he gives her, which prompts the next thing. While she's down there, she kissed them, kissed his feet. Now, she didn't need to do that, clean up on aisle 7. but something in her is stirred to give something back to the one who is giving something to her. Their eyes meet, and then she takes out the only thing that she has with her, what used to be her stock in trade in the town. And she opens it, and the perfume wafts through the room. And she takes it as she's bent down, and she pours it, not on his head, which is what you normally did with perfume, but on his feet. This is a woman who has tasted what it means to be richly forgiven. Now let's go back to the justified in his own mind moralist. I suspect that as Simon watched all of this, he sat there with quiet and growing contempt. It starts with, why is she here? And then each sort of level takes him down, down, down. What is she doing here? Why is she lingering? What is she doing with my guest of honor? What is she doing with her hair? What is she doing with kissing his feet? And I suspect that when she pulled out that jar of perfume and the aroma wafted through his room, that was just too much for him. And I think something inside sort of let loose and exploded inside and probably said something like, this place smells now like a whorehouse. Verse 39. Luke records, when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. Now remember, this is a fellow that looks at himself and sees himself as a moralist, a good guy. And in this particular situation, you might say, well, the last part of this, he would know who is touching him. Shouldn't Jesus know something about this woman? Somebody certainly told him, or if nobody did, it shouldn't be hard to read between the lines. What kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. You can sort of think, okay, well, yeah, I can see where he's critical and criticism and contempt of her. It's not that big a reach. I fight this battle when somebody jumps in front of me on the freeway. Or when I'm coming to a four-way stop, and I'm well aware of what the rules are at a four-way stop, but apparently not everyone is. I am the moralist. Good enough. Feeling a little superior to that moron who just went past me. That's Simon. What you don't expect in the story, though, is that he shows contempt not for her, but for Jesus. If this man were a prophet, he would know who was touching him. The idea is contempt. He has just as much contempt for Jesus as for the woman, which is really quite amazing when you think about it. He managed in his own mind to out-moral Jesus. Do we really have that ability to be that critical, that nitpicky in our own heads to do that? I mean, if we could do that with Jesus, who couldn't we do this with? Now, it's at this point that Jesus can read his mind, knows exactly what's going on inside his heart, and he tells a parable. He says, Simon, 2 men were in debt to a banker. One owed 500 pieces of silver, the other 50. Neither of them could pay up. So one guy owes 10 times as much as the other, and they're both in trouble. Neither of them could pay up. So think about, let's say you have a friend. A friend has a $20,000 car loan, and he's making his car payments. Those 72 monthly easy payments. He's sick of those things. Wish they didn't. I shouldn't have signed up for this big a loan, this big a car. I didn't need this. $20,000. And now he's thinking, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to pay this. And you're thinking about your friend. You think you got problems. You got to see what's going on in my house. I've been out of work for 2 years. We are 6 months behind on our mortgage. We're in the process of getting foreclosed on. We're we're going to lose our house. And in addition, I also just got a letter from the IRS saying they want all of our back taxes due immediately. You owe $20,000, which you're sort of paying on, maybe. Mine is $200,000. That's the storyline so far. The banker canceled both debts. So in our particular story, let's say that your friend gets a call from his attorney. He goes into the attorney's office. He's kind of sweating a little bit. The attorney says, I have good news for you. You have an uncle that used to live in Ohio, Dayton, Ohio, and he just died. Apparently, you were his favorite nephew. He wrote you a check. He wanted specifically for you to pay any of your debts. I turned around and wrote that check out to the company that carries your car loan, and I have your title. Here it is. Now, that fellow's going to be going, wow, no more car payments. Honey, now we have another $450 a month to live on. And you are thinking, well, goody gumdrops for you. Could have given some of that to me. Josh, we're in 10 times more trouble than you are. You still have a job. You get a call from your attorney. You're thinking, the whole thing's about to cave in. The house of cards. You sit down, and your attorney says to you, one of your friends knows your predicament. He wanted to know how much back taxes you owed. I told him. He said he wrote me a check for the whole thing. I already mailed it in. He said, what? And a second friend of yours came in. He sat down. He knows about you on the verge of foreclosure and financial ruin. He wanted to know how much back mortgage you owed. And I told him. And he cut a check for that too. Your payments. So that second guy also wanted to give you a job. You have the picture that Jesus told told Simon? That's sort of the difference in magnitude of these two. Then he asked Simon the question. I'm going to nominate this question for rhetorical question of the year. Now, which of them will love him more? Now, Simon is such a moralist, and he can see his head is heading towards the guillotine, that he is trying not to answer that question lest he be the one that yanks the handle on the guillotine, cutting off his own head. So this is how this proud man answers the most rhetorical question ever said. I suppose, perhaps, maybe, in some cases, maybe not. I suppose the one who had the bigger debt canceled. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. There's nothing that a moralist loves more than knowing he's right. Got the right answer. Heard the test, got it. What he doesn't know is the hammer's about to fall on him. Now at this point, Jesus takes the two and puts them together. A contrast. Right there at the dinner party with all the guests. Jesus turned toward the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? There's another rhetorical question. Yep, I got that one right too. I know exactly where she is and what she's been doing for about the last 10 minutes. Got it. You see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet. Now, in that culture, they didn't have paved roads. They had dirt roads. They didn't wear shoes. They wore sandals. There's dirt and dust everywhere. It was a common thing in that culture to drive the front door to have a bucket of water and some towels. And common courtesy was that when you had a guest or a traveler come, you offered them to be able to wash their feet with the water and the bucket. And Jesus says, you did not give me any water for my feet. I walked in here as the guest of honor. no bucket, no water, no towels, no effort, no apparent thought. But he's a moralist. But she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. He's saying, Simon, at a very minimum, what you could have done is just for no other reason than sheer obligation washed my feet. But she's not washing my feet out of sheer obligation. I'd like to coin a new word. Not out of obligation, but out of sanctification. That's not sanctification, how a person with a lisp says it. Not a good word, though. Sanctification. This woman, from the time on my feet with her hair, you did not give me a kiss. Common culture back then, greeted like they do in the Middle East now with a kiss on each cheek. He says, I walked in, you might have done, hey, dude, that's about it. No kiss, no approach, no hug, nothing. No effort, no action. Apparently, not even a thought. She, over here, not kissing his head, my feet. She hasn't stopped doing that from the time I walked in. You did not put oil on my head. Another common courtesy of either respect or affection. Somebody came in, especially on a hot day. But she has poured perfume on my, not head, feet. Almost as if to say, she didn't think herself even good enough to do that with my head. But it was enough that she could do that and give that kind of thanks in what looked to her like the smallest of ways. That was enough. And that was way bigger than what you did, because you did nothing. And yet, in your mind, you're the moralist. Now, the last thing that he turns the table to sort of drive home this, not just to Simon, not just for the woman, but for the guests who were there. Verse 47, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, for she loved much. Now, don't turn this lesson backward. It's not a situation where, because she came in and was so loving, how could I not forgive her? That's the opposite of what happened. She tasted forgiveness out there somewhere. And she retasted it again in relationship with him several times during that dinner. And because that forgiveness and that taste ran so deep in her, she realized how extraordinarily much she had been forgiven. She extraordinarily loved in return. Our capacity to love is largely a reflection of either how small our capacity of forgiveness is or how large. If you're the moralist, it's going to be very hard for you to forgive, because you're going to have your little pencil out. You're going to know what somebody should have done. And it was me, I would have done this, and I wouldn't have done that. And no matter how hard you try to hide that critical spirit, it's going to be felt in relationship. Nobody feels loved by the moralist. And it's not enough that you think you're a loving person. What matters is, do the people around you think that you're a loving person? Does your wife? Does your husband? Your kids? Your parents? People that you're in the Bible study with? And he says, he who has been forgiven little loves little. Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. They'd already been forgiven. He's just reminding her of that state that she's still living in. And if she felt any kind of shame in that room, it's needless, he's saying to her. Now, why is Simon loving so poorly? Well, we've sort of hinted at this. But verse 49, we get a look at Simon through his guests. The other guests began to say among themselves. Not out loud to Jesus. Not out loud to where she could hear this. I don't even know if they said it to where Simon could hear this. But man, the words were flapping. criticism moving. They said among themselves, who is this that even forgives sin? That same sort of contempt and disgust and critical spirit just comes pouring out of them like water out of your kitchen faucet. It's almost like it's so regular they can hardly even help themselves from doing this. Think about this. She walks in the room. She's obviously been moved by the ministry of Jesus and the relationship that he has with her. And not a single person in the room gets up to go give her a hug. Nobody walks around to offer her some help with her tears or with the mess. Nobody gets up and goes to get a towel or water. Nobody comes over with a kind word. They all sit there around that table just as smug as they can be. Criticism just flowing around and around like horses on a merry-go-round at Disneyland. We start out the message by saying that the story previous to this was the criticalness of all of our human nature. All of us. Perversity that we have, that we can take even somebody like John the Baptist and be critical, and we can take somebody like Jesus Christ and be critical of him. We can be critical of anybody. And he says at the end of that story, which precedes our story today, this is what he says. Wisdom is proved right by all her children. In other words, by their fruit you shall know them. Show me the people that love well, and I'll show you the people that are on a right track. Show me the people that are the moralists who are smug, sitting on their hands with a hard heart and critical thoughts. I don't care how moral they think they are or what kind of knowledge they stand behind. They have missed the boat. In other words, he would say, probably to all of us, because I could see all of us sitting around that table too, myself included. Go ahead and minimize the sin you do. Let it be just conduct that other people do that you don't do. And think about those who are obviously inferior to how you're doing your Christian life and you're living your life, and how you're parenting your children, and how you're loving your husband and your wife. And your heart, little by little, will get smaller and smaller, harder and harder, and you will find it easier to just be like pins out of that pin cushion, out of that pin cushion, out of that pin cushion. Virtually with everyone without even having to think about it. Way of life. As I thought about this passage this week, I want to tell you, this is a hard thing to put together. Because I found myself resisting this all week. I did not want to think of myself like this. But you know what I was reminded of time after time after time? Every day, throughout the whole day, every day of the week? That comes so naturally to me. Wherever I go, whoever I'm around, I don't even need to be around somebody. Just the memory of them or the thought of them can set me off. In other words, I'm Simon. Maybe you are too. But it doesn't have to be that way. Because this dear lady over here found that elusive it that we are all looking for. That knowing look from someone else that says, I know your past, and I even know your present. And all is well. Let's pray together. Father, we ask you to do a work in us that we are absolutely incapable of doing, and that is shutting off the faucet of being critical, of nitpicking the people in our life to death. And it's possible for us to, while we're doing that, to still feel like we're the good person, we're the good guy, we're a loving person. Father, would you save us from this? reach down into our heart and take that pride that drives this. Take your chisel and hammer and do some work in our lives. Help us to look up and see you in the wonder of the gospel that looks at us, in spite of whether we're the immoralist or whether we're the moralist, and says, because of me, all is well.
We invite you to come worship with us every Sunday at 9:30 in Irvine, California. And you can visit our website at pacificchurch.com to learn more about upcoming sermon series and our church family.